TEA Presents session. All right, at this point in time, because we are running a bit late, I would like to introduce our speakers. If you could please come up on the stage and have a seat. Martin, please. Hello. Sigurd, do you mind joining us? Tom and Brad. And notice this is in no particular order. This does not imply importance of any level whatsoever. You can't hear anything? I've been told you can't hear anything. Does this work better? Okay, I'm going to suck up to the mic. Anyway, you know what? We're just going to wait till this passes. Okay, I think the parade has moved on to a different part of the neighborhood. All right, anyway, welcome very much. This is a very special session. This is actually... This is actually a session put together by the Themed Entertainment Association. So it's leading experts in the field of creating themed experiences more than anything else. I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves a little bit because we have some fantastic experts on the stage. But first, is this working? Okay. And this is why integration of technology is very important. There we go. So our session today is on creating and executing world-leading immersive experiences. And everybody on this stage has, let's just say, years. I won't date them that much, but years of experience doing that on a global basis. Everybody's involved doing work here, well, almost everybody in KSA, but we've done work globally, all of us as a group. The Themed Entertainment Association, as I said before, is an association of It's a trade association of specialists in creating immersive and themed experiences. So that can be anyone from an economist, financial feasibility person, to an operator, to a systems integrator, to a theming designer, to the creative people, those people that actually come up with the ideas, execute them, and bring them forward. We do have a booth here if anybody wants to go and learn more about the association, but it's essentially a networking group of people that have been in the industry for years. Every year we do a specialist panel, such as this one, looking at a specific topic and talking about the pitfalls and the key lessons that you can learn if you're looking to actually build your own experience. So myself first, I'll be very quick. I'm a founding partner of LDP. We do market financial feasibility for attractions. And as you can see, all over the world. There we go. Now I'd like Tom, if you don't mind, to stand up and talk a little bit about AOA and yourself.
Okay, let's try this. Talking about yourself is not super fun, by the way, but...
you have to eat the mic.
You do? It's got to get way up here. Okay. I'm Tom Acom. I'm the co-founder of AOA, a concept design firm through project management of themed entertainment. Prior to AOA, I spent about 15 years in the design department at Walt Disney Imagineering. And most of our work is in the immersive design environment. So we've earned a few TEA awards over the years, somewhere around 30, and we're based in Los Angeles and Winter Park, Florida.
Yeah, and if I could just add for anybody who's not familiar, the TEA award is actually for excellence in the industry for an attraction. So that's a pretty big thing. Some of their clients, if you want to say anything else, Tom, you, no?
No.
No, okay, moving on. I said we do this fast.
That's plenty of information.
Okay, Martin, would you like to talk about yourself a little bit? You're not on. You're not on.
How about that? There we go. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Yale. My name is Martin Howell. I run a business called Tech4. We're a immersive experience design and engineering company. One of our probably most famous projects was with Disney, Star Wars, for their That's the one. Smuggler's Run and Rise of the Resistance. We actually worked on both projects. We did the complete design and engineering management of the immersive systems for those projects. That was a lot of learning went on in that project for us and the client, and perhaps we'll talk about that as we go through.
Yep.
We also, yes, next slide, please. We also do kind of unusual one-off projects, and this is probably a good example where the image on the left shows the sketch that the client gave us, and that was the brief. Can you build this? And it's a map of the world, and all of the screens are video screens. It's a large video, three-dimensional sculpture with balls that rotate and open up and create a little show. So we took that sketch and we built it, start to finish, end to end, and we shipped it during lockdown, and it went to Moscow in Russia at Sheremetyevo Airport. That was the last we saw of it. So testament to our operation instruction manuals, the client in Russia actually assembled it themselves, and I've not yet had the pleasure of seeing it work.
Okay, Brad, would you like to talk a little bit about ProFun?
Hi, my name is Brad Merriman. Closer, closer, closer. My name is Brad Merriman. I'm a partner at ProFun, where I've been for the last 30 years. We're a 40-year-old operations planning, advisory, implementation, and management services firm, focused primarily or predominantly on visitor attractions and theme parks. Regionally, we've worked on some pretty exciting projects. We were the operations team for Ferrari World, initially Yas Island, Doha Quest, which opened a couple of years ago, as well as Desert Falls, also in Qatar, and we're working on a bunch of other stuff regionally and within KSA, which I can't talk about today. Internationally, some of the more exciting and fun things we did was we did the Harry Potter attraction north of London. We do a lot of work with Crayola, Netflix, and corporate brand experiences like Ford Motor Company, Hershey's Chocolate World, Coca-Cola, and a number of liquor and beer manufacturers, which I won't talk about today. And I'm thrilled to be here to join you.
Thanks, Brad. And then Sigurd, if you'd like to just give a little bit of your background.
Yep. Hello. My name is Sigurd Slåttebrekk. I'm running a company in the media and entertainment industry, mainly focusing on TV, feature, and stage productions. But now we've taken a step into the themed entertainment industry also with our first project recently, which won a Thea Award this year. So we like to work on projects that entertain, that are fun, but that have a secondary, an underlying message, whether it's culture, music, or environment. So as you saw a little clip of here, we're also working on a large-scale ocean health program in cooperation with UNICEF, UNESCO, and other major partners. I brought a video with the Music Factory. You need to turn the volume up, please.
The Music Factory started out as a live concert performance, a spectacular and unique family experience. Hundavassen Fairy Tale Park wished to develop the show into a fun, playful, and one-of-a-kind new theme park attraction. The aim was to lift the presentation of classical music even further and to change the way music is experienced by combining art forms and to include interactivity. Using existing technology, together with music and animation, Animando and Expanse created a cost-effective, groundbreaking attraction that truly engages, inspires, and captivates the whole family.
Right, so as you can see, we have a broad breadth of experience here on the stage. We have the operational side review, we have the technology and integration side, we have the creative and production side, and of course we have the music and the other senses that are very important to integrate very early on. We're going to talk about a bunch of topics today, But before we talk about that, let's go back to our actual title, Leading Immersive Experiences. So immersive is a word that's used quite a lot. But I want to know from everybody here, what is your definition of immersive? Brad? Keep it short.
My definition of immersive would be something that's an experience that's participatory, surrounds you, and engages you, and invites you to interact with it.
Okay. Martin?
Yeah, from a technical point of view, when we're looking at pixels, there is a specification, and we use that on the Disney Star Wars ride. It was, we wanted to put pixels everywhere you could see, so you were visually immersed. But at the other extreme, emotionally immersed. You can be emotionally immersed in a book. So I think the word immersion now spreads that whole range, right?
Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think as you talk about immersive environments and a word that's used for everything right now, it's not just the stimulation of your senses in the environment. There's a few things that it isn't as well. It isn't superficial, and it absolutely isn't distracting. It's a very focused environment. So.
Okay. And Sigurd, what would you consider as your definition of immersive?
Well, I would say it's an experience in space and time, and can it actually be reduced even to a simple sound 3D modeling in complete darkness, which is the simplest form of immersive. But nowadays we tend to think of it as a multi-sensory experience that creates involvement.
So my definition until recently was actually, it's the ability to cause a suspension of disbelief, which basically means you're not in that place, but all of a sudden you believe you are. And that's what it was until recently. But just a year ago, one of the EME board members did a really good presentation on immersiveness, and they came up with 4 different definitions of what immersion actually is. And I give full credit to this to Wim and his group at their university, by the way. The sources are at the bottom. So this isn't my thing. But one of them is what they call spatial immersion. So you feel like your environment around you has changed completely. Another one they defined was social immersion, where you are interacting with characters, with live people, and you feel like you're part of the story. You and others engage in it together as a group. Another one is the narrative immersion, very similar to what they did at Star Wars, which is where you have a solid storyline going from one set to another to another. You are part of the story, you have some tasks, but it's very controlled. And then finally, there's the systems immersion, which is where you use the system itself and the technology to give the individual the feeling that their actions matter. So basically, when you're shooting, if you get more points, and then you're doing something good for the individual goal or task, whatever there is. So yeah, keeping those all in mind, because I'd never looked at it before, but I think it's a good way to look at it. I'd like to move on to our panel session now, and we can put the slide back up. So we're just going to discuss a bunch of topics and kind of go through the process a little bit, and gain some insight from our experts. I'd like to point out that when we talked about this all about a week ago, we realized that with all 5 of us here on stage, we could do a fantastic job between the operations and the design, the blue sky thinking and production and tech and sound and music effects, but we're not going to go there. Anyway, moving on. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit is that first stage, which everyone starts with, which they consider concept development. And normally, a client or whatever will start, and they'll go to someone like Tom and say, build us some pretty pictures. So Tom, what do you have to say about our first stage in terms of how to create what's best when you're creating an immersive experience?
Well, our answer to that question would be no, we won't. Because the beginning of these projects is typically, we always say that we design by, written story or Microsoft Excel. You've got to align the team on step 1. In fact, thinking about the work that ProFund does, the least successful projects that I've been engaged in the beginning are where the operator's not present. And, maybe you don't need to be there for all of it, but you have to, this industry has become more about the magic you make within the box and the boundaries that you're given. The most creativity that you can come up with, you have to have a feasible plan. You have to get things built. You have to get things done. So those first conversations are typically, and this is pretty much 50 hours of my week every week, is trying to extract the key milestones or the key goals of the project before you get creative, so that you know what those boundaries are and you can start off on a path that's going to get that project built.
And I'm going to put my economics hat on first and say you need to
Absolutely.
know what the market can support and what the competitive environment is, because if you build something that somebody else has built, you're just going to cannibalize each other.
That's right. We obviously, Meow Wolf, you guys should be familiar with. It's a great
Yeah.
example. We've been responsible for the execution of all of them except for the very first one that they did
Yeah.
with their wallets
Organically,
on nights
yeah.
and weekends. And that was after the very first phone call. We said, where are the analytics people? And you need to engage somebody. We're not telling you who, but you need to find somebody, and here's a few names. The next part of there's this project Netflix, which Brad mentioned, same thing. Get the analytics in place. What do you want to do? If you do it that way, if you engage all of the right parts, you're going to set a roadmap for success at concept development.
And I think, so you brought in, get the operator on board early on, but I think, again, normally people would say, concept development, then systems and purchasing, then build it, then run it. That's the normal process that people who are not familiar with the industry would go with. However, I think, Martin, you have some strong feelings on when systems integration should actually happen.
Yeah, I think most of the design thinking and the decision making should be done as early on in the process. One of the things we like to do, we call it calibrating. We want to calibrate our expectations with the rest of the team. So we want them to see the things we see. And then when we get to a point where we're all comfortable, we know how to turn what people are experiencing into technical specifications. We know how to build that equipment. We know what equipment's needed. But there's no point in specifying and detailing all that work out if the client's imagination is over here and ours is over here. We also need to understand the budget and the delivery timescale to just make sure everything is realistic in terms of meeting expectations, really. It's about that process of calibrating expectations.
And I think, Sigurd, your background, as you said, was music, always. But then you became involved in the entertainment industry with the Music Factory. Do you want to talk a little bit about your learning during that time and how you worked through it all?
Well, music in its essence is about non-verbal storytelling. And taking that into developing a themed entertainment attraction has been, I would say, a valuable experience to bring in. We're working with dramaturgy, working with rhetoric in the same way. And I would say that the turning point in our development was the idea of using something called synesthesia, which is a cross-sensory condition where many people, some people I would say, hear, see shapes and colors when hearing music. This is a real sensory condition that lots of famous artists like Beyoncé, Kanye West, Billie Eilish, etc., Mozart, if you go back in time, had. This idea was the turning point for the development of the project that gave us the possibility of involving multi-sensory impressions.
And I think the interesting thing about music and other sort of special effects, but really music, is that all of us are working in a space where we're doing international attractions. Music is a universal language. So, I would almost say, and I don't know if you agree or not, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, but I think music should be there at the very beginning when you're coming up with the storyline. So if you don't have to do it in a foreign language, you can actually convey things through the music.
I agree, and in our case, we had a rather unique approach to it because we decided very early on that the music itself would be part of the story development. So we built a storyline, found music for it, which fed back into the story development. So music was actually kind of a criteria for the development.
So the music was one of the stars.
Exactly.
Okay. I'd like to move on a little bit. So this is great. So we're at the beginning of our process. We've got a great idea, blue sky thinking. We've actually done the right things. We've got the music guys on board. We got the technology guys on board. We got some operational insight. And now we have to bring that dream to reality. What are the kinds of challenges we run into? I'm going to start with Martin on this one.
Oh.
And how did you deal with them?
How do you deal with the way we deal with everything is to follow a process that we call designing for certainty. We don't want to find out things on site. We don't want our customer to discover things when they start using it. We want to be as absolutely certain as we possibly can. Why? Because I'm quite old and I've done this a long time, and there's a lot of bad memories when that hasn't happened. We don't like experimenting or prototyping on a construction site. It's the worst place to do these things. It's expensive, it's hot or cold. It's just not an ideal place to work. So everything we do to design for certainty in that process. We take a concept and we engineer using modern engineering modeling technologies. We do trial builds and tests, but increasingly now we build digital twins of that physical environment, and not just a 3D model, an absolutely functioning, fully functioning digital twin with all of the software, all of the content, all of the app integration, whatever's needed, so we know that when that equipment is shipped, we know it works in a 3D model, the software's been tested in a physical space, then when it goes on site, it happens really quickly. We like to be the last in and the first out. That's the kind of way we approach that.
And Tom, what about from your perspective? From you've done the pretty pictures, now you got to deliver it.
Yeah, well, one thing I would mention, getting to the pretty pictures, and the team that I'm sitting here with today has to be a partnership, because a lot of times you have to attack the lack of clarity from the owner's vision together. If they want the images very quickly, or they want something that they can pass along up their own food chain, you have to be aligned. You have to be aligned very quickly. Otherwise, you'll never get that back. So in the very beginning, as you're putting the drawings together, and the process of inspiration of those drawings is very different for all of us. Sometimes it's historical based and you've got to take a deep dive into the past. Sometimes you have to pull out your wildest dreams. All of those things together. But once you've got that together, what's the next big thing we haven't talked about? The budget. There's the reality and the abyss of reality. And the reality is that there is a boundary. I was chuckling just recently because for the untold number of times in my career, I've had somebody say, just get started, there's no budget. Budget's not a concern. Budget's always a concern. So give us, maybe we can tighten the box up a little bit as time goes on, but you do need to kind of put your boundary around it to start. And that's usually where the rubber hits the road for us, is you try to triangulate down with those first images and those first concepts to get out of the client's mind what they want. And then you have to give at least a macro level boundary to get started. You also have to have the conversations with the operator, which I'm very passionate about. I just worked on a project where the operator wasn't present for a year, and maybe 20% of the work that was done was usable again. So after you've got that vision sold, what's next? Turning it into reality and making sure that it's within that box.
Naturally goes on to you. That's your cue.
Thanks a bunch. So our job as the operator or operational advisor is not the fun stuff. So we don't design, we don't manufacture, we don't come up with the great ideas, the reasons that all the guests want to come, at least the first time. Our job is a little more boring than that, and I like to think about what we do is asset utilization. Our job is to make sure that this really expensive or nominally expensive, depending on the project, finite piece of real estate, we can maximize the utilization of that asset in terms of productivity, in terms of visitation, in terms of revenue, but also in terms of operating costs, so that we can peak our peak periods, but not be overly expensive to operate, overly cumbersome to operate during off-peak periods. So it's all about asset utilization, And how do we get there? The way we start there is we start with the 5 Ps, which is prior planning prevents poor performance, and that's really what we focus all about, so that we do things like minimize the challenges we have once we get on property. And that we do that from the very beginning, and I think that's what that's what Tom's talking about relative to getting an operator involved early on. Our experience is the earlier those conversations take place, the less likelihood there is for increased schedule and cost.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, I mean, going into the budget and talking about operational efficiencies and all that, I mean, at the end of the day, this is still a business. And we have to remind ourselves from the beginning, it is the business of fun and of giving people a good time. But if it doesn't work and it closes down, it doesn't help anyone. So it's important to keep an eye on those numbers from the very beginning. But along those lines, I'd like to go back to Sigurd for a second, because I know you're, as you said, new to the industry, but your recent project actually got a FIA on, for being able to do something on a limited budget. So what was your experience with that? How did you keep within the budget? How did you actually make sure that everything worked correctly?
First of all, I'd say that we had a very close cooperation with partners, very good partners, that were all working towards the same goal. And I would say, like all of you here are suggesting, spending enough time in the planning period, refining the core of your idea. And we spent years and years developing this, and spent years also going up the wrong alleys. And having the courage to leave that when you don't feel confident of where you're going, allowing yourself the time to refine the idea before you go into production. That's essential to staying within a limited budget.
So that's interesting, because that brings up basically, it's the ability to admit that you were wrong and say, okay, I messed up. Let's figure out another way. A lot of times what I see from the projects we work on at the beginning is they say, this is the project and we're going to go forward with it. And then there's this wonderful word called value engineering that happens. And value engineering is basically taking the initial concept and just cutting the budget. But I'd like to hear everybody's thoughts on value engineering.
Happy to
I
take
think
the
Tom
beginning
looks
of that
ready
one.
to go.
Know a thing or two about it. I think when it became words that were used together, I was around for all of that. First of all, there's only one moment to do value engineering, and that is at concept. You need to figure it out right then programmatically, program level value engineering. If you don't do it at concept, any owner that's going to try to claw back that funding later is wasting their time. They're better off going and finding more money and keeping the thing on the trail that it's on than to chop it. So the VE process in the beginning, back to that operational partnership, is absolutely critical. It's not a surprise. It's a natural part of the process, is getting through VE. But it has to be done at concept at the program level to make it at all effective. There's a project that we're working on right now that was tremendously over, and we inherited a conceptual portion of it. And I just told the owner the other day, and I said, listen, the only way you're getting back where you want to get is to stop doing something that you're doing. You can't nibble away and try to find your way through VE.
Yeah, so the most successful, the most compelling projects that we've worked on post-opening day are all projects that had minimal late-stage value engineering. As Tom said, I mean, those questions, those issues have to be addressed at the very outset, because once you're well down the road, you're already in detailed design, or worse, in construction documents or on property, and you realize you're spending too much trying to deal with it, then it's too late. The projects that we had where they remembered their 5 Ps, they were realistic from the very beginning. They paid close attention to design, paid attention to cost estimating from the very beginning. Projects like the Harry Potter project north of London, projects like the Crayola Experience, they came out exactly as envisioned. We opened something last year that did late stage value engineering, and we're still trying to fix it.
And how are you trying to fix it?
Finding more capital.
Right, so basically you're replacing the quote unquote value engineering by adding more stuff.
all the stuff that we pulled out, we're trying to put back in.
So I think that that's a lesson learned right there.
So it was not very valuable value engineering.
It wasn't valuable
No.
value engineering. Okay. Martin, I think when we talked the other day, you had a point about technology and how it can add so much to immersive experiences, but that there are dangerous things that you have to watch out for in terms of like testing and making sure you understand the tech, et cetera. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, in most of the projects we get involved are very much state of the art, using cutting edge, sometimes bleeding edge technology, and it's really having a sense of what technology is going to stand that transition from concept through to delivery. And a lot of that comes from, I've come from a manufacturing background as well, so having a sense of what really is going to stand the operational test of time is important, and I guess that's experience and lessons learned. That process of value engineering, actually, I enjoy, strangely. I think it's a very healthy process done at the right time, because it actually it forces the whole team to really focus down on really what are the things that are going to deliver the value and the outcomes. And the right things get cut, they fall to one side. There's always a solution, I tend to find, ultimately. So I think getting that process done early on, and then locking in, testing that design and build for certainty is the thing that has stood the test of time for us.
And I'm just going to add a little comment here, which I can't believe I'm saying, but I think one of the issues or mistakes that I've seen with delivery of things is when they get into the value engineering, it comes down to the cost of the various elements. So people will go for the cheapest versus the best, and that actually causes more problems operationally later. And I'm sure, Brad, you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, that's certainly one option to try to solve the problem, which is to go to the cheaper version. And in some cases that works out okay, but in most cases it doesn't, because the cheaper version, if it works to start, will often deteriorate and become obsolete faster and have to be replaced. So you're really going to pay more in operating cost. That's another solution, is you take equipment that's envisioned to be capital, so you decide, well, instead of spending money up front, we'll lease it, but of course that encumbers the operation. So those types of solutions generally don't work unless you get lucky. So our preference is, on a very limited basis, if we have to value engineer things, is to do the main stuff we want to do right and leave something to a subsequent phase. The worst case scenario is when you have to do both, which is you have to cut key components of the attraction or key components of the development, and then skimp on the rest of it, and that's just a recipe for disaster.
And I think this goes back to the beginning of our topic today, actually, which is we are supposed to be creating immersive experiences. So if the technology doesn't integrate well, if the storyline doesn't work with the actual hardware that's in there, if the music doesn't match with the story, if the operations are inefficient, it therefore doesn't give the guests what they need, which is that immersive experience. But I'm just noticing the time now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow each of the panelists to ask one question to one of the other panelists and try to put them on the spot. Tom, you go first.
Okay, it's for you, Sigurd, because one of the things that I've always leaned into in our conceptual design work is I've always believed that the musical score, well, first of all, I believe that music is the world's true time machine. If you want to go back in time, you can listen to something from your childhood and it takes you there. Has your work ever influenced concept design in a way where the concept was modified to match the content that you'd created? That something was heading in a direction, even in the media content creation, and then the idea that you came up with shifted that direction in a positive way because of the score that was created?
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, the music was key to the story development in the way that it actually we used it actively, starting with a storyline, finding music, seeing what happens in the music, that fed back into the story development and concept design. I really have some experience along those lines.
Okay, by definition, Sigurd, you're next.
I have a question for you, Tom.
I don't
Great.
think they planned this at all.
No, it was unplanned, I promise.
So, looking around, seeing the endless possibilities that we have when it comes to design, light, sound, immersiveness, I see sometimes the danger of sensory overload. How do you use that in your, it's a bigger question I know, but in your development process, how do you make sure that in designing an immersive experience that you always keep track of the story, the point of the experience, and not letting all the possibilities take you in a wrong direction?
That's a great question. One of the things that we say in our kickoff meetings is that the benchmark of immersiveness is nature. If you want to be immersed, go on a hike and feel what's around you. And there's nothing that's artificial about any of that. When you're at a convention like this and you see the availability of technology and ideas, I think the key thing is maintaining true to the storyline. If you're doing that scene by scene, you'll know if something's going to fit in or if it's not going to fit in. And you have to be very careful because we've all experienced attractions that don't have seamlessness to them, or where some piece of technology or some idea or a color palette even is more of a distraction than it is an immersive environment. So it's extremely challenging because the world that Martin lives in is actually surpassing our ability to tell some of these stories. And I'm a big believer that you shouldn't reverse the content or the mood that you're trying to create into a piece of technology. You need to engage somebody like Martin and say, pay attention to what we're doing, and then when the moment's right, get you involved to try to develop something to do that. I don't have a great answer for how we avoid it, but I know we have to pay attention to it, or these stories that we're trying to tell will be more about the in-your-face gear than they will be about what you want people to feel when they leave. That's the goal. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to take action? Do you want them to just laugh? Do you want them to actually ponder what they experienced forever? What are you after? And you have to really follow all of this stuff, and at the same time you have to ignore it when you're designing.
Hey, Martin, your question?
Yeah, a question for Brad. So is there a piece of technology, a type of technology that when you see it on a spec, you kind of roll your eyes and go, oh, this is going to cause me some...
One perfectly comes to mind. Expo 2010, we ran the Information and Communications Pavilion, which was the joint China Mobile, China Telecom pavilion, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but it was a personal user device that was a bespoke device, and untested, unproven, and it looked great. The experience didn't really need it, and it fell apart pretty quickly, but the experience was amazing without it. So fortunately for us, this device, which we didn't like to see in the first place, didn't work well, really didn't diminish the experience by ultimately not using it. And you're only open for 6 months. It doesn't give you a long time to fix the problem. So at the end of the day, it worked out fine. But when we first saw that device about 90 days before opening, we just cringed because it was custom, bespoke, personal user device.
Okay, Brad, your question now.
I kind of just answered my own question, but I'm going to ask it of Martin. So Martin, you talked a lot about integrating, refining, testing prior to going on site, long before going on site. What happens when you don't do that? What's your experience when you haven't done that, or if you haven't been able to?
No more than 1 minute, because otherwise you'll be here for hours.
late nights, tired people, late openings. It just goes increasingly wrong. And then those problems actually get thrown over to your teams, right? It's like, we opened. You know,
We also do a lot of corporate brand experience work. And again, we're not the people that create that emotion. We're the people that try to fulfill it on an ongoing basis. But most of those projects, most of those initiatives, that's what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to create an emotional attachment, an engagement with the guests, and it's not necessarily through, you know, the biggest and fastest roller coaster or the most immersive experience. They're using storytelling and they're using your emotions to pull you in and interact with you.
Okay. Any other thoughts from the panel? Looks like they all agree. All right, well then to wrap this up, I'm going to ask each of you, please, if there was one key takeaway you wanted this audience to have at the conclusion of this session, what would it be? Sigurd?
Well, I have the less experience here in the panel, but I would say from my experience with developing themed content is finding a concept and staying true with it, spending enough time developing the core.
Tom?
I think it's almost obvious since none of us had met before. My, I guess, key point here is these projects are never done by one person or one company. Anyone that says that they are isn't playing by the rules a little bit here. It's teamwork. And if you do it right, not only is the project successful, but the best part of this industry are the relationships that you build that go on for 30 or 40 years. You'll bump into people in strange places, and it's an instant rapport, it's an instant friendship again, because we're all kind of moving around the planet here building these things. So teamwork is the key to 100% of the success of these jobs.
Martin?
Yeah, I'm going to take a left field here a little, and I'm going to talk about, mention AI. We've got a group in the UK now, 750 strong members that we formed, and the progress of those technologies on the impact of everything must impact our industry. So I would think about how that will inform the process and the outcomes, and especially the kind of guest engagement and the insights you're going to get and learn about your audience and deliver more personalized experience, I think, and deliver content in an interactive way. I think that's really where the future's heading. So, and in the timescales we're talking about, that technology is moving fast enough for it to be relevant now.
And Brad, your final thought or takeaway?
Yeah, I already, well, actually said it earlier, but as the group that's responsible or tasked with or focused on the performance of these facilities post-opening, the performance of these attractions, the 5 Ps, prior planning prevents poor performance. There's almost not enough planning you can do for something like this, and at least as an operator, even with all the planning that we do, the planning is really to minimize the number of mistakes we make and be prepared to address any challenges that arise. So, the 5 Ps.
Okay, well, the one thing I took away is don't be afraid to admit you're wrong and fix the problem before you open. But thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. I hope the audience enjoyed the panel.